We're talking today with Jacob Mole of Rockford, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Jacob, can you begin some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, December 15th, 1986. I lived on like the west side of Grand Rapids with both my parents, and then had a bunch of siblings. I had, let's see, 4 brothers and a half sister over the time period. Ended moving up north, and then once I graduated high school, just had a couple years and decided to enlist.
Okay, where did you go to high school?
Cedar Springs High School.
Okay, and what was your family doing for a living when you were growing up?
My dad did work as an electrician. He traveled all over the United States, and a lot of the time I'd go with him on different trips and stuff like that, so I guess that kind of got me accustomed to moving around. My mom did both stay-at-home mom and dental assistant and just kind of various jobs if we needed to have the extra income.
Okay, so when you're traveling around with your father, were you kind of learning the electrician's job along the way? Or?
No, most of the time not. Maybe when I got a little bit older, he started to show me different things, and I'd help him out moving batteries because, batteries can get a little bit heavy being an older guy. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, he just taught me like the very basic stuff about electrician work.
Okay, so what did you do once you finished high school?
Actually, I just did various jobs. Just wanted to see what was out there. I was going to go to school, and then decided not to, and because it was expensive. I mean, it's always expensive, but I worked at a day camp or a summer camp as a videographer for a summer, and then after that, I was like, I'll just get enlisted. So.
All right. So when did you decide to enter the service, and which branch did you choose and why?
I'd say it was around May of 2011 where I decided to join. I met with
Well, you just said 2011?
Sorry, not 2011.
There you go.
2006.
Mm-hmm.
And so I talked to a recruiter, and then the whole process of getting the paperwork done and everything like that, I swore in officially on September 11th, 2006, which is kind of ironic. But I still had to wait. I was in a delayed entry program because specifically I wanted to work on aircraft, and so I shipped out in February.
Okay. Now, why the Marine Corps?
Well, I chose the Marine Corps because when I was a kid, I actually went to the Young Marines of Grand Rapids. I was in that program for about 8 years. So that kind of really put the background into me about the Marine Corps and everything like that. And so I figured, why go anywhere else? I should just go somewhere I'm familiar with.
Okay. So what do you actually do in the Young Marines?
I mean, in the Young Marine program, basically, they would teach you how to march. They would teach you how to stand in formation. They would teach you about integrity, different values that a lot of kids might be lacking, and just kind of like leadership skills and stuff like that. So by the time that I was out, I had the leadership skills that could help me obtain rank as time went on.
Okay. All right. So now where do they send you for training?
What, for Marine Corps?
Yeah.
I went to San Diego. I was there for recruit training, and once I got there, I mean, it was February. It wasn't too cold when I was there, surprisingly. It got cold at night, but during the day it was still pretty hot. And yeah, so that's where I started out at.
All right. Now, in the Vietnam era, Marines showing up, MCRD San Diego, have a routine they go through which involves a lot of yelling and yellow footprints and things like that. What happens to you when you actually arrive in San Diego? What's the in-processing like?
We arrived at the airport, and I don't remember what the airport was called, but once we got there, we had to hang out in some little corner office somewhere, and just all of us were waiting for the drill instructors to pick us up, and then we got on the bus and started heading over, and then like you were saying, yeah, once we got to the thing, a drill instructor got inside the bus and was like, get off my, bus. And so we got out and started get on the yellow footprints and got in formation, and then from there it was just like go, 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 go the whole time. Everyone yelling and screaming in your face, grabbing stuff, getting all your gear that you could get your hair cut. or lack of haircut there, you know. And then they put you in just a huge squad bay. Just everyone gets stuffed in there at once until they figure out who's going into which unit. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole like first 48 hours is just crazy.
Okay. What time of day did you actually arrive at the depot?
I think it was like 10 at night. So we got there at about 10, and then honestly I don't remember what time I went to sleep. I know it was still dark, but it was probably close to, I'd say, 5 in the morning, because they woke us up at 7, and I knew it was 7, but yeah, we were pretty tired still.
How much of this stuff were you expecting?
I was kind of expecting I guess the craziness a little bit, just because was used to it from, you know, the previous training with the young Marines and stuff like that. They kind of treat you in that same kind of manner, but not to that extent, you know. So it was a lot more than I was used to, but you know, just stand there at attention and do what you're told to do, and then everything would be fine. And that's basically how I treat, you know, the whole basic training.
Okay. Now, once they've processed you, do they organize you into companies or platoons, or what are they?
We were in a platoon. We were in Fox Company, and I think my platoon was 2134. We had 1 senior drill instructor and then 3 drill instructors, and I had a kind of a weird group of people, because I had 3 of the drill instructors were gunnery sergeants, and then we had a sergeant. So we had, you know, 3 veteran drill instructors in just my platoon, and then 1 new kill hat that would just basically go ballistic on us at all points and times for no reason. But I think that having those guys as my drill instructors actually created a better platoon overall. Just, you know, it was really well-rounded, all of us were.
Okay. Now, were the experienced sergeants, I mean, had they been to Iraq and Afghanistan or things like that already?
I would assume that they had been. I never really got to know them that well, and if you try to ask them a question, they'd probably punch you in the face, you know, and tell you to shut up. But yeah, most of the time we didn't really know much about them. We just knew some of their jobs. Like one of them was a tank operator. And that's all we know. Most of them were infantry type kind of
Okay.
Marines.
So what's the curriculum in boot camp at this point?
Well, they have the first phase, which is basically all the knowledge, and that's like the first month's worth of training. So you go through and you have your little green monster, which is like a little book that they have, and they just are like, just train. You know, you got training, physical training, you know, and they start picking that up, but it's mostly just knowledge. They pack a bunch of knowledge into Marine Corps history, first aid, rifle. I mean, they start teaching about the rifle and stuff, but it's a lot of Marine Corps history too, which is kind of interesting. I wasn't expecting that.
Mm-hmm. All right. And that's what the first 4 weeks, and then what comes after that?
After that, we got phase 2, and then they actually sent us up from San Diego up to Camp Pendleton, and up there we did all of our field training. So most of the first like 2 weeks was all rifle training, and so that was going to class and talking about rifle training. And those that, I mean, there's some of the guys in the platoon that didn't know how to shoot the broadside of a barn, you know. They never shot a gun in their life. Where for me, it's, you know, I've been shooting a little pellet gun and working my way up when I was a kid, so I was used to shooting. So the classes to me were really boring, but I still learned, you know, on how to, I guess, become a better marksman and stuff like that. And then we had a week of class and then a week of firing, and then a final qualification day. And then after that, it was more or less just outdoor training. We had the Crucible, which was like a 3 or 4 day long event where you're basically outside and you're doing, you know, all sorts of different obstacle courses or night navigation and everything like that. And then once you're on the last day, they bring you up what they call the Reaper, which is like this hill that is on an angle that if you stood fully straight up, you'd fall backwards, you know. So you got your main pack and you're going up the top of the hill. And then once we got up to the top, they gave us our dog tags. And that was like, well, that was like the end of that second phase. It was the next big step, and then we went to the third phase. So.
Okay. Now, what kind of rifle are they training you on?
We got trained on the M16. I don't know which. I think I guess it would be the A2. So just the normal M16. Iron sights was the main thing when I was in. I know that they upgraded it. Most of the people were being taught with the ACOG scopes, but for us it was all about having the iron sights and being able to still hit a target at 500 yards with iron sights.
Okay, so but that's just the old-fashioned sight on the rifle, so the
Yep.
little guide on the top, and not a fancy scope or something like that.
Correct.
Okay, so learn the basic skills first. And when you're doing night navigation, are they giving you a GPS, or do you just get a compass? Or?
No, you get a compass, you get a little flashlight with a red lens, and you just have to try to figure out where you are. I mean, they would be shooting flares up and stuff like that, and you try to keep your cover, because what it was is it wasn't just night navigation. You had to be concealed and not get caught by the enemy, kind of thing. And so you had no idea where the heck you were going or anything like that, and you just hope for the best kind of thing. But you have your little map, you have your compass, and you try to get from point A to point B.
So did you get caught?
No, actually, we made it through.
All right. Now, were you with a team, or?
Yeah, we were broken down into fire teams. I don't remember what position I held on that, but I wasn't like the team leader, but I was one of the guy, like the second guy. So.
Are those four-man teams, or?
Five-man.
Okay.
Five-man teams. And I know that one of the drill instructors is kind of like in charge of a group of the teams, so he was kind of like running between all of us and trying to make sure that we're staying concealed and everything like that. And there was other drill instructors, the ones that were trying to find us.
All right. Now, for Phase 3, do you all still stay together, or do they split you up to different specializations?
No, in Phase 3, we're still in the same platoon, and that's mostly, it's all about physical training. Like the whole time you're doing immense physical training, but you were also doing a lot of marching. That's all the marching, getting used to that and getting it kind of perfected. And they have all the final inspections and stuff like that, uniform inspections. So you learn how to take care of your uniform, how to get it just right, so you look presentable. And then, yeah, it's basically all just the final qualification stuff, swimming qualifications and MCMAP, Marine Corps martial arts training.
Okay. Now, within your platoon, I mean, what kinds of people were there? What kind of backgrounds did they have?
Everyone that was in my platoon specifically, I think there was a lot of guys that were actually from like California. There was a lot of guys from California, a lot of guys from Texas, and then a lot of guys from Ohio and Michigan. And that was really the big groups of people. Sometimes you get like someone from Hawaii, or something like that, but a lot of us were from those four main states. And it was just kind of interesting. I mean, you got a lot of guys. We had a lot of Mexican guys in there. And so they kind of brought like this interesting, flair to it, I guess. But it was fun, and I mean, I got to know a lot of them. But my rack mate ended up also being a guy from Michigan. He was from Kalamazoo, so we grew pretty close during basic training.
And do they separate the men from the women at this stage of the training?
Well, we don't actually. In San Diego, there's no women. I mean, the only women that we would see would be the corpsmen, Navy medic women, and that was like kind of weird to us. You're not seeing women anywhere, and then like this woman just randomly shows up and she's like, "Let me take your temperature," and you're like, "What?"
Okay, because they have women at Paris Island, so that was.
Yeah. They do the dual training there, but I know that they said that they keep them separate. But yeah, there's no women. I never trained any kind of combat training or anything like that with women.
Okay, so how long is the put the three phases together? How long do you spend in basic training?
I don't know the weeks exactly, but it was about 3 months,
okay,
give or take a week. Yeah, that's about it.
All right. And did you have an MOS yet, or did that get assigned later?
Actually, my MOS was assigned before I even went to boot camp. They assigned it as a 6213, which is a fixed wing air mechanic, but when it came down to what I'd be working on, that was still kind of up in the air.
Okay. So what do they do with you after you finish the training? basic training?
Once I was done with basic training, I went home. I was on home leave or whatever you want to call it for I think 2 weeks. And the first week it was it was fun and seeing my family and everything like that. And then the second week they actually extended it because it's only supposed to be about a week long. But if you get an extension, then you basically work with the recruiter, and then work with the poolies that are waiting to be shipped out and everything like that, and try to like gather up your friends and be like, hey, you should join the Marines, So the recruiter has some numbers that he can, show for it. But yeah, it was just a 2-week kind of like little vacation, and then ended up going back to Camp Pendleton for my Marine combat training.
Okay, so you still get combat training no matter what your MOS is going to be. You still
Correct.
get that.
Yeah. If you're going to be specifically an infantryman or that kind of MOS, then you go to the SOI, which is the School of Infantry, which is also, I don't know if they have one in on the East Coast, but the School of Infantry was basically the same place that we were at in Camp Pendleton, and then we have the MCT, which is like the abbreviated version of the School of Infantry. So we're only there for about a month, whereas they're there, I think, for like 2 or 3 months.
Okay. Now, how does the program at this stage differ from what you had at Camp Pendleton before?
Well, for this, there was a lot of combat training with arms, and instead of just holding the rifle and then doing obstacle courses like that, you're actually using rifles. You're doing like live fire ranges while you're firing in a line and walking forward, or doing bounding, so you're moving up and firing at estimated distances. So it's like they have targets out there. I remember there were metal targets, and you'd have to fire on them, but you didn't know how far away they were. You had to kind of use your best guess at what they were. We also got to fire larger weapons, just more than the M16. I know we had the, I think it was called the M240, which is the underslung grenade. They had some, fake rounds for that we got to fire off, and then 50 caliber machine guns and a couple other larger weapons, stuff that we wouldn't probably normally see being where I'm at, but we still got to fire them anyways. And throwing grenades. So a lot of that kind of stuff, a lot of armament training. A lot more of the land nav training. Since we're based at, basically it was all in this kind of like valley where the Marine combat training is going on. So once we did one day where we had day nav, so we're going from point to point. And this, we don't have to be concealed or anything like that, but they still, keep in mind you don't want to be at the top of the hill, because then they can see you. Try to be concealed, but it wasn't as strict as it was in boot camp. And then try to collect as many points as possible by going to all these different points. And then we did the exact same course, but at night. So of course it's a lot more difficult, and you're going around in mountains and stuff like that, and you take a wrong fall and you end up breaking your leg. Well, one guy actually did. He went off the side, and it was a little bit of a fall, but.
Okay. Now, in these different stages of training that you're going through, what proportion of people make it through?
I know for boot camp we had a couple guys wash out. Once they first get there and they're kind of like freaked out and all shocked about it and stuff like that, they do everything in their power to try to get out of there. So I think overall we would start with, I think, about maybe 50 people, and we'd lose about 5 throughout all the training for basic training. And then for Marine combat training, most of the time everyone stays in unless medically something comes up. A lot of hikes took a couple guys out medically because they started getting really bad shin splints because they had in the pack and they were going up mountains and stuff like that, and it's just their legs couldn't handle it, But so they would just get dropped back to a different class and then have to go through it again.
Right, but for the most part, people could take it physically. They could.
Yeah.
They were
Yep.
up to it in good enough shape to do that.
Yep.
All right. So now you've got all this. You've got your infantry training and so forth. Now do you get some specialized training?
Yeah. After Marine combat training, they sent me to Pensacola, Florida, and that's where I went to my A school. I never figured out what A school stands for. It's just A school. And there I learned specifically about turbine engines. And so I was there in class for about 3 months, and it was kind of similar to what you would think it'd be like a college class, where you go in there, I mean, other than you got the morning formations, that's not going to be in college, but you go in and you sit down and you have different instructors. Some of them are civilian, some of them are Navy, because it was a Navy installation. And they would just teach you everything you would need to know about aircraft engines, not just, turbojet, but prop engines and, helicopter engines and stuff like that, and all the different things that come with it. So once we got done with that training, the top people in the class got to basically choose what platform they wanted to work on. So the guy that was number one, he took the one helicopter spot. And then I was actually the second guy, and they're like, well, what do you want to work on? And I'm like, well, what aircraft makes it so I don't have to go on a boat, right? Because I didn't want to have to go on a ship. And they're like, well, that'd be the Prowler. And I'm like, I don't know what that is, but sign me up, And because the other options I had was to work on F-18s or work on Harriers. And I knew what those were, but yeah, I never heard of a Prowler before. So I signed up for that at the end of my training.
Okay, so what is a Prowler?
Prowler is it's a fixed wing aircraft. I think it was Pratt and Whitney made it, or is it that they made the engine? I'm not
make
sure.
the engines.
Yeah. But it's an old aircraft that was originally called the Intruder, and they used that during, I think they used it a little bit during the Korean War, is when it was made, like in the mid-50s or early 50s. And then they used it mostly in the Vietnam War as a surface-to-air missile destroyer, and kind of some radar blocking. And then once they saw the capacity that it had for electronic warfare, they changed it. They altered the airframe and created a two-cockpit aircraft that was just for electronic warfare. And so basically what it would do is it could go into an area, wipe out the radars without having to destroy them. It would just jam them. It could conceal other aircraft from radar, conceal itself, or make it look like there's just a ton of aircraft, And there was a lot of other stuff that it could do, but I can't tell you what it is.
Okay. Because I remember that during the original Gulf War, one of the things that happened was that we were basically able to kind of shut down the Iraqi radar capacity. In some cases, my impression always was that we were blowing it up.
Yeah,
but
not always blowing it up. I mean, for the most part, they have these little, they call them pods. I don't remember if there's any kind of name for it, but we just called it pods. I had this weird little fin, but that was like the main electronic jamming interface. And so basically, they would just flip a switch, and these things would start radiating out to mess up all the radars and stuff like that. And I know that they could use them to pick up like communications between enemy people and stuff like that, and then relay it back to whoever so they could translate it. So that was one of the cool things about it.
Okay, but ultimately the original aircraft is something that's a lot older than you are.
Yeah.
I mean, now were they, when you actually got to work on the aircraft themselves, were they ones that had been around since the 60s, or were they, as far as you can tell, built more recently than that?
No, I mean, all the original airframe was converted from the ones back in the 50s. So, I mean, the core of the airframe was still the old aircraft. And, I mean, there might have been pieces and parts that are newer, within 20 years. That's new. But everything we had, for the most part was, rebuilt or refabricated, either way, but they would try to keep it all as original as possible. They didn't want to make any major changes on it or anything like that. Once they kind of had it set, that's what it was. So it was an old piece of crap, but it was fun to work on.
All right. Now, did you train for that at Pensacola or someplace else?
For actually working on the Prowler, once I chose that aircraft, they sent me to Whidbey Island, Washington. And that was like the main Prowler fleet that they had for the Navy. And they also had a training squadron. I don't remember the number for it, but it was like a Marine Corps and Navy joint training squadron. So that would train the pilots on how to fly them and everything like that. But that was the school that we had. And for there, we worked on the specific components of the Prowler for what I would do. So we worked on engines specifically, but I also had to learn about the fuel system. I had to learn about the oil system. I had to learn how to work on the landing gear and stuff like that, because as a power line mechanic, my job wasn't just working on the engine, you know. We were the ones that actually later on became plane captains, so we could do inspections on the aircraft and that way ensure that they were safe for flight.
Okay. So you're kind of learning all the operational aspects of the aircraft and the systems that make that work, as opposed to the whole radar jamming stuff, which another set of people would work on.
Yeah, those would be the ECM guys, electronic countermeasure. They would be the ones working at that, putting the pods up and stuff like that. And if there was any issue, you know, they're the ones that would be fixing it. And they would know more about that system than I would. I just knew that, hey, it's not shaking loose, so, you know, it's not going to come off.
Okay. Now, how long did you spend at Whidbey Island?
Let's see. I went there in October, so it was about 2 months, because I left in November right before Thanksgiving. I actually came home again on leave for a week and surprised my family because they didn't think I was coming home, and then I was like, hey, I'm here for Thanksgiving, yay. But yeah, it was about 2 months there, just working on the systems there.
Okay. Now, when you're in Pensacola, when you're in Whidbey Islands, you're Seattle. I mean, now at this point, do you get to go off base and do things?
Yeah, actually, when we were in Pensacola, we were able to kind of go off base, but we weren't allowed to have any vehicles of our own. They were really kind of stringent with that. I think they had probably issues in the past. That was always the case. If there was something we couldn't do, is because someone screwed it up for us, you know. But in Whidbey Island, I mean, they didn't say we couldn't have a car, and I actually had a cousin that was at a base, a submarine base that was like 2 hours south. He's like, hey, I'm going underway. You want to borrow my car? I'm like, yeah, you know. So on the weekends, me and my buddies would all pile into his little Dodge, and we'd drive down to Seattle and spend the weekend down there. So it was pretty fun, and we didn't have to stay on base. I mean, base was nice, but it was kind of like wet and cold the entire time, so it's like, let's go to Seattle.
All right. So now, after you get to go home for Thanksgiving and so forth, and then are you going to deploy from there or go back to Whidbey Island, or what happens now?
No, once I got done at Whidbey Island and I went back home, I transferred to Cherry Point, North Carolina, and that was where I was, you know, basically adapted into the fleet. The first unit that I got put into was VMAQ-3, and they are actually getting ready to deploy in like, I don't know, like 20 days. And since I arrived there, they're like, this guy doesn't know anything, because it's kind of true. Like, you go through school and you learn all this stuff, but at the same point in time, you don't really learn anything because they kind of just saturate you with so much information, and then you get there and they're like, yeah, don't remember any of that stuff. We'll teach you the right way here, you know. So once I got there, they're like, well, we're gonna trade you out with somebody from a different squadron because they've been in the fleet for a year and they haven't deployed, and you just got here. So I was in VMAQ-3 for only a few days, and then that was supposed to be like my home, you know, so to speak. And so they put me in Q2, and then I was in Q2, and I learned basically everything that, you know, they would have wanted me to learn working on an aircraft. And the only difference between the Q3 and Q2 and everything, it's basically just a different squadron. It's the same thing, you know, same amount of aircraft. It's just a different command and everything like that.
Right, and they rotate, deploying them in different places.
Correct. And what it would be is you're on a 6-month rotation, and for the most part, usually it was two squadrons being deployed at the same time to the same place usually. And they might be doing different missions at the, you know, or whatever. Some will be doing day missions, and the other squadron will be doing night missions. But they usually worked in tandem that way. And then in case we needed to like take any parts, we could go across the way and swap out parts with them and stuff like that. So it was always a joint effort between the squadrons.
Okay. So then, how long did you wind up spending at Cherry Point?
Well, I was in Q2 with them for, I'm trying to remember, it was like a few months, and then they were getting ready to deploy. So again, they transferred me to another squadron, and I got to Q4, And then once I was there for maybe like a month or two, and then once Q3 finally got back, they transferred me back and put me over there. And it was kind of a, I don't know, kind of an irritating thing because it's like every time that I would transfer, you'd have like this little information packet that shows all the training that you did. And of course, when you get transferred over, some stuff would get lost in translation, and then it's like, great, I already did this training, and now you're making me do it again. Like, I remember 1 year, you're only supposed to go to the gas chamber like once a year, and I think 1 year I did it like 5 times just because, oh, we don't have proof that you did it. I'm like, I know
Okay.
I did.
Explain the gas chamber part.
Okay. The gas chamber is when they basically put you in this room that's all enclosed and stuff like that, and they have these tear gas capsules that they put on a little burner, and I don't know if the burner is just supposed to agitate the crystals and put them out into the air, but you would put on a mop suit, which is like a chemical suit, put on your gas mask, and then they'd file you into this room. And then we did the same thing during boot camp and stuff like that. So they start training you, once a year for gas training. But you get inside this room, and then they have you test to make sure that your mask fits and everything like that. And then they have you do some exercises to get your heart rate up so you're not breathing shallow. You have to breathe, some air. And then they tell you to take your mask off. So that way you're breathing in the gas. I mean, it doesn't harm you, at least that's what they say. It doesn't harm you, But it would, you couldn't open your eyes. If you did, they would just slam shut and be watering. It was really hard to breathe that stuff. You'd be coughing and sneezing and stuff like that. But it was just in a way kind of like to almost mentally train you as well as physically train you in that kind of capacity for understanding what it is to be tear gassed.
So in this case, you're really well trained.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Now, once you're back with your original squadron, now are they now on a rotation where they're just staying home for a while, or?
No, once I got back and everything, because once they were all originally back and I finally got transferred over, that was like a month and a half already went past. So we were already looking down at deploying again in, let's see, it was October of 2009 is when we were going to be shipping out. So once I got over there, and it's like, all right, I need to really get my butt in gear with trying to get everything redone. So I got my plane captain before deploying, so that way I could actually be, looking at aircraft and everything like that and inspecting them and actually doing my part the way that they needed me to. So October rolled around, and then that's when we left. We went to Asad Air Base in Iraq, and I don't know, I was kind of like, I wasn't worried about deploying, but I just didn't really know what was going to happen. It was just kind of like, you just don't know. But when we got there, the base was really, really big. They have what's called the north and south side, and we were on the south side, so it was kind of empty. We had these little huts that we lived in that were basically made out of like shipping crates, but they were nice. They had doors on them, they had windows on them, they had an AC unit. Didn't expect that, There was a little store that you could go to and buy like protein shakes and soup. There was a gym across the road, a chapel across the road, so it just wasn't what I was expecting. You hear all these stories about these guys being in Iraq, and I'm like, I guess being on a base is, was a lot different than being out beyond the fence.
Yeah, and some bases were a lot more elaborate than that.
Yeah.
Too, but how did they, now before you went to Iraq, did they do anything to prepare you? Did you need shots or other kinds of stuff?
We went to, I always forget the name of this. It was a base. It was in, I think it was in Nevada. It's where they do the Top Gun training, I think now, or they used to do it there. But it was a desert base, and that was kind of to get us used to like the extreme high temperatures and the dry weather and stuff like that. And we were there for a month even before we deployed. So the pre-deployment training, and it was a little bit different. And they just try to get you used to the way that it works as you're overseas. You'll be working on 12-hour shifts, and you're either day crew or night crew. I was always night crew. It was kind of nice, but yeah, you just get your work done, you do the flights, and then that was basically it.
And do they try to teach you anything about Iraq itself or the culture, or how to behave over there?
No, not really. I think they don't really care. I mean, they would do some stuff, but for the most part, it's kind of like in one ear and out the other, just because they're like, you're never going to be really dealing with these people, you know? I mean, we had a couple people that were on base that would be selling stuff at the bazaar on the north side of base, but they're like, you don't deal with them, you know, so you don't really have to worry about it. And we're like, okay.
Yeah, I guess with the kind of job that you had, you'd be doing that on a base, and
Yeah.
so you're not wandering around out there in the countryside or anything else like that.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. And then how do they physically get you out to Iraq?
I know that when we left, we shipped out on C-130s, and we flew to Germany. And then once we got to Germany, we were there for like a day for some reason. I don't know, it just took forever. And then we took like a commercial airliner to Kuwait, and then we were there for a couple days. And then again, we got in on C-130s, then we flew into Iraq. And that's basically kind of like jumping us across.
Okay. And what was your first impression of Iraq once you got there?
It was really hot. Because when we got there, I mean, even though it was getting towards the end of the summer, I mean, it was still, during the day, it was like 120, 130 degrees, and it's just like, being from Michigan, that's freaking hot, you know? So, not liking the hotness, not liking how dry it was, and there was also, I wouldn't say a sandstorm, but it was definitely windy enough that it was kind of causing a slight sandstorm. So, that was like, welcome to Iraq, where it's super hot and sandstorms all the time.
All right. Now, you're coming. Your whole unit comes in together, right? So you're replacing another unit, or?
Well, we don't all come in together. They have a forward unit, so to speak, and they actually move with the aircraft. So they leave about 2 weeks before the main body does, and then they follow the aircraft, and if anything comes up, then they have to fix the aircraft as they're going, and they go through like grease and stuff like that. But when we got there, the aircraft weren't there yet. They had a problem, so they were still back in some island somewhere trying to repair the one jet, and then finally they're like, screw it, and they flew over most of the jets and left the one that was broke there. But for the most part, yeah, they send the forward guys first with the jets, and then by the time that the main body gets there, we all get there at the same time.
All right. Now, was there another unit that had been there that was still there and was leaving?
Yep, that was Q1, I believe. They were still there, and they had us in these. They call them hazes, or a haz, which is, I guess the best way to put it. It's like a super bunker for aircraft. I don't remember how tall they were. I think 50 feet, roughly, and it was all concrete. These are things that were made by Saddam. I mean, this was his base back in the day. And they were, to protect the MiGs and stuff like that. And he had it where, I mean, they had these huge blast doors and everything like that. So these things were made to withstand a lot of armament being pounded on it and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, they're pretty interesting to look at. Ours had dual tunnels, so they were just 2 tunnels side by side, and then they would go out right onto the runway, And then Q1 was probably about, I don't know, 1/8 of a mile away down the runway, and they had a single haz, so they just had the the thing. So it was nice because we could put our aircraft in there if we needed to work on it outside of the sun or whatever. We had one where we had to take apart the fuel cells on the inside, which is, I mean, you get stuck in a hole that's tiny and you got to rip this fuel cell out. It takes a long time. It took like 2 months to get that fixed, but it was just nice to have that, and it kind of gave you, I don't know, I guess a kind of sense of safeness, because if they were to, launch any mortars or anything at you, you're in this huge, 16-foot thick cement barrier. So yeah, but the thing was, I was kind of weird that with Iraq, and I said it was really easy when I was there, is that we never got attacked. At least when I was there, the entire time, not one gunshot, not any mortars, nothing. I mean, the biggest risk that they ever told us, they're like, see that fence? And they're like, yeah. And you're like, don't go beyond the fence because there's probably mines out there. And they're like, okay, I won't do that. And that was really about it.
How far was the base from Baghdad?
I think they said it was like 100 kilometers
Okay, so it's a ways away.
west. Yeah.
Was there a major town at all that you were closer to, or?
No, it was literally in the middle of nowhere. And I think that's the way Saddam wanted it. I mean, there was an oasis that was there, and then they just kind of built around it. You could see where there was like a bunch of MiGs still like laying in pieces everywhere, but it's basically what it was. It was just his old base, and then they took it over and kept it.
Okay. Now, when you got to Iraq, how much did you know about what had gone on there or the course of the war at that point?
Like previously,
Yeah.
nothing at all. It was all just kind of new to me. I mean, I didn't really read up on it or anything like that. I just knew that when we took it over or took it back over, I knew that the hazes that our aircraft were in were pretty much blown up. There was, a lot of patchwork done. They had to rebuild it because they blew holes in the side of it to destroy the MiGs that were in it. And you hear just weird kind of stories about how Saddam treated his people and stuff like that, because there's a huge soccer stadium, and I guess that's where the Iraqi Olympian soccer players played or whatever, but it's just weird stuff that you would hear and stuff like that. So it's kind of just this really crazy compound. They had like an Olympic-sized pool in the north side and stuff like that. So I think it's just kind of like his leisure area, military, but also for different like sports and stuff like that.
All right. Now, did you have a daily routine that set in fairly quickly, or?
Yeah. Since I was on night crew, that meant that we worked from, it was like 5 until 7. So 5 at night until 7 in the morning was our shift, give or take a half hour. And basically, we'd wake up and get evening chow for breakfast, go to work, and then they would do the changeover. So all the staff NCOs would go meet in the main area, and they would talk about what needs to be done and what wasn't done and why it wasn't done. And then they'd come back and relay that to us and be like, hey, get this done, do what you can. And we're like, okay. So being the night crew, we were mostly the guys that just but we would send the aircraft off for missions. They like to do a lot of their missions at night, probably because you can't see the aircraft then and stuff like that visually. So what we had to do then is, as they're doing the meeting and stuff like that, we're prepping the aircraft, getting them ready to go for their flights. We do like a quick daily inspection on it and stuff like that, or what they would call a turnaround inspection, which is like a very, very abbreviated daily inspection, just to make sure all the key components are in place and ready to go. And then we'd have to put like support gear on the side of the aircraft, because the aircraft is so old it doesn't have a auxiliary power unit to start it up. So you'd have like a little truck, I think they called it an NC-10, and that was just for power. And they had this other thing, they called it a huffer, which would just blow air into the engine just so it would spin. It's kind of interesting, but you get those all set up and ready to go. So then they're like, okay, the flights are at this time, and then the pilots would show up, and then we just launch them out. And usually it was always 2 aircraft at a time. I would say it was never more than 2 at a time.
Okay. And once you launch the 2 aircraft, then do you just sit around for the rest of the shift until they come back?
Yep. If there was nothing to do, if all the aircraft are taken care of and everything like that, for 6 hours, because they'd be gone for about six hours or so. That's about the length of their missions, and then we would just be sitting around, watching YouTube videos or something, because we had Wi-Fi there, so we could just mess around on our computers and whatnot. It was just kind of weird. But if there was work to be done, we're like, all right, as soon as they're launched out, and then we tackle whatever needed to be done and get it done. We wouldn't rush it at all. We would just get it done when we got it done. Get it done right the first time.
Okay. And how long was this deployment?
We were there longer than you normally would be. But I got back right around the middle of February. So and the reason why the changeover was a little bit different is because we were the last Marine Corps unit, air unit in Iraq at that time. The Navy actually came in and relieved us. So once they showed up, and then we were doing like kind of joint missions with them for the last couple months. And then once they kind of took over, we just started flying like training. You know, the officers needed flight hours and stuff like that, so we did that kind of stuff. But we helped them do the changeover, and then we left, you know. But it took a little longer because we had to grab all of the leftover Marine gear that was left behind by different squadrons, not just Prowler squadrons, but like Harrier squadrons, F-18 squadrons, and stuff like that. So everything was coming back with us. It was kind of a pain. But yeah, we got back sometime in the middle of February. At least I did.
So how many months had you been gone?
No, I guess it wouldn't have been October. So I guess we left in the middle of August. Sorry about that. I was having issues in October, so I always think of October. But so it was the middle of August when we left, and then we got back in February. So that was about 8 months, 7 or 8 months.
Okay. Now, what specific kinds of problems would show up with the aircraft, or were there things that you had to do a lot of?
Well, there was things I had to do a lot of, and it wasn't necessarily a problem other than the fact that the aircraft is very, very old. Every time the aircraft came back, at least when we were overseas, we would have to do an oil change on it every time. And the reason why is because most of the time that you would have it, the oil filters need to be changed every 30 flight hours. So most of the time, they would, if they did any flights during the day, and they did some at the night, so the aircraft would come back and we're like, oh, guess what? They can't fly because they'll go over the hours. So you're always doing it a little bit early, you know. But yeah, do an oil change. So you have to take the whole filter out. You have to dump all the oil and re-put the oil in. I mean, it was just a very repetitive thing. And then if you didn't have to change the oil filter, you'd have to pull what they call 10 hours, is you'd just pull oil samples in these little bottles. And then you'd check it for any kind of metal or foreign objects that was inside of the metal or the oil. And then for things that would constantly break, it was always airframes. The airframe was, I mean, it was old. So there was always something that was coming up like, hey, airframes, you know, you guys lost like something or something happened. And they weren't just in charge of just the frame, but actually the controls and stuff like that. So it was a lot of work for them. They were working probably more than anybody else besides us in the power line.
Now, did dust create problems?
It did and it didn't. I mean, the way that it created problems when we did the oil samples, because having high amounts of silicone in there created problems. And they're like, hey, there's too much silicone. But it's like, so we had to make sure that no sand got in there, because they're doing it parts per million. You put one, you know, a couple small swaths of sand in there and the whole thing's screwed up. But I mean, for the engines, I don't know, it didn't really cause any issues. And we would be washing the jets like every couple days, especially if there was a sandstorm going on. They're like, all right, time to wash the jet. And I'm like, okay. You just get out there and just go to town, spraying it down, washing all the wings and everything like that. Like, we would try to keep it kind of bone dry on the outside, because usually when you're back in North Carolina, you want to keep it nice and greased, because the ocean water and everything like that will start making stuff corrode. But over there, it's like, no, keep it as dry as possible. That way it doesn't have any sand clinging to it. And if there was any spots that were kind of like leaking through the underside of the aircraft, it's like you got to clean it up quick.
All right. Now, working these kind of long shifts and sort of day after day, I mean, does that kind of wear on people mentally or physically after a while? I mean, does morale get affected at all?
I mean, I think it does. There's always, I would say probably about right past the halfway point, or right about the halfway point where people start like getting really pissed off at each other, and you know, the staff NCOs are yelling at you for no reason because they're just angry about their lives and stuff like that. So there's, you know, the tension's pretty high, but then as you get closer to leaving, you know, it's like, okay, you know, we're leaving soon and stuff like that. I mean, everyone had their own way of coping with it. I mean, once I got done with my shift, I mean, if I had free time and the gym was open, because it usually was open most of the day, They're like, hey, I'm going to go to the gym. And a lot of people would go to the gym and just kind of work out their frustration there. A lot of people would just sleep during the day if we didn't have to do anything, you know. So there's just different ways. I mean, with where our buildings were for where we slept, we were actually only like I don't know, maybe 200 feet from the runway. So anytime there was like F-18s or anything taken off, I mean, the whole place would just shake. I got in the habit of wearing headphones when I slept, and to just listen to like classical music and just go to sleep, you know. And it sucked at first because I couldn't sleep because having music playing all the time was just kind of weird. But then after a while, it's like I couldn't sleep without music, you know. But yeah, so that was my way of kind of keeping it good for me, just listening to music and going to the gym.
Okay. And how much contact did you have with people at home while you were deployed?
Well, I usually had the opportunity to talk to them at least every day if I wanted to, but I think I usually kept up with everything about once a week just because, I don't know, I've never been a really big like chatter when it comes to being on the phone and stuff like that. Like I'll send a text or an email, but I'd get on like Skype and video chat with my family every now and then and just say, hey, you know, same old, I'm okay, and it's really hot today.
Now, during that tour in Iraq, were there any kind of unusual events or things that kind of stand out in your memory that happened while you were there?
Not really, no. I mean, it was literally a cakewalk of a deployment, and it was kind of almost makes me upset, you know. It's like nothing happened, and it's like, well, I guess it's a good thing though, you know, that nothing did. But yeah, I mean, it was just really, really quiet.
Yeah, I guess in the larger picture, it's sort of post-surge at that point, or a lot of in the earlier, very difficult period, while we were figuring out what to do, that was already past, and by this time, things were settling down, at least for the time being.
Yep, definitely.
Unsettled since, but okay, you did that. All right, now you get back to the States then after this deployment. You get to go home for a while.
Yeah, since we get like 30 days of leave per year, and by that time I, you know, saved up, I don't know, I think I had like 20 days. So I went home. I was home for 20 days, and by that time it was like right on the end of winter. So family went up and went like snowmobiling for the weekend up in the UP and stuff like that. I had a lot of, you know, money to burn. Being some young kid that just got back from a deployment feeling invincible, I'd be like, hey, let's go rent some snowmobiles and drive really fast.
Getting as far away from Iraq as possible.
Right, exactly,
okay.
Exactly. So, yeah, you know, spent time with my family, just relaxed, kind of unwound, and then once I got back to Cherry Point, it was just everything starting all over again. We start taking the aircraft like really apart. They do, I think they call them 365 days, so it's like a yearly thing that they take the aircraft so far apart to look at all the components to really clean it, because you guys still got sand everywhere, you know. And as much as we tried to avoid that, you know, they do it. And sometimes we'd have to change out the engines just because they're like, well, it's that time. And then we would lower it, put it on a cart, and then we'd get a new one and put it back in. Well, not new, but refurbished one, and putting that one back in. But that was, I mean, a lot of the maintenance was a lot more heavy duty once we were back in the States, just because they wanted it to be perfect. You know, they wanted us to be ready and have everything good to go before our next deployment, which was going to be like 6 months from then, you know. So that's basically every day is just work. You know, it's a lot different. You'd think it'd be more work overseas, but it was a lot more relaxed. And so they were talking about having us go to Japan, because they used to do like mini deployments, like 3 months long deployments over in Japan and stuff like that. And so when we first got back, everyone's like, yeah, we're going to Japan. And we're like, yeah, that sounds fun. And then like a month after that, they're like, no, we're going to Afghanistan. And we're like, oh, okay. So we started getting ready for that. And then a month out again, we did our deployment, the pre-deployment training. And this time we went to Yuma. And that was a little bit different than the Navy base I was at. The Navy base was kind of like far from anywhere else, but Yuma was just like right on top of the city, you know. And by this point, everything was a little bit different because I was, higher rank. I was a plane captain. I was working on my CDI, which is a collateral duty inspector. So what a CDI does basically is he inspects the work that plane captains do. So it's the inspector and the inspector. There's always like a fail-safe to try to figure out if something goes wrong, there's somebody to blame, right?
Now, do you have a lot of new guys who have joined the unit since you got back from the previous deployment too?
Yeah, we had a couple guys. I mean, they were at the end of their enlistment, and they did not want to re-enlist. So I think we lost like four guys or so, and then we gained another like 5 guys. They're trying to like bolster our numbers a little bit, just because we were actually gaining another aircraft. We only had 5 in Iraq, and then they're like, well, you guys are getting another one, so we're adding about 30 people to all the different shops, so we got a couple people, airframe's got a couple people, and then they threw another aircraft in our squadron. But besides that, I mean, it was still mostly us younger guys that were in there, and then now we're the ones that are teaching the new guys how to do everything and telling them that everything that they learned in school was crap. And it's just like, I remember this like a year ago.
Right.
Role reversal. But once we got everything all set and everything like that, and we did our training, we deployed to Afghanistan.
Okay. And do they take again the route through Germany or something else?
Trying to remember. I think we did go through Germany that time. Yeah, we did go through Germany. Again, it was the same airport. I remembered it because when we were there the first time, they're like, hey, you guys can get beer. And I'm like, sweet, okay. So we went through, and this time they're like, no beer. And I'm like, oh, okay. We ended up drinking beer anyways, but, that's how it is. And then we went to, I think it's Kyrgyzstan.
Well, there's Kyrgyzstan, maybe.
Yeah,
there's Tajikistan,
Kyrgyzstan.
Uzbekistan. There's a lot of
It's like
stands.
right on the border of China and Soviet
Yeah,
Union.
probably Kyrgyz. There's a Kyrgyzstan specifically,
Yeah.
And there's also Kazakhstan is farther west and bigger, and that's less likely.
Yeah, so we stopped there, and that was kind of interesting. Like, I wasn't expecting to stop at some place like that. I didn't know where we were going. They're just, get on the plane and go. But once we got there, we were there for the day waiting for our next flight, and that actually brought us into Afghanistan. And they're like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. And they had all these like weird little shops set up, and they were selling like a bunch of old like Soviet gear that you could buy like super cheap. So I ended up spending probably like $200 when I was there, just on a bunch of weird Soviet stuff that, mailed it home and stuff like that. It was kind of fun. But yeah, once we got back, we jumped on another commercial airliner, and then they flew us over to Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan.
Okay, and then did you stay at Bagram, or did you deploy someplace else?
Nope, that's where I was the entire time. Didn't do anything outside of the fence, so to speak. Just stayed inside the base. I mean, that was maybe because I was so used to being on the smaller side in Iraq of that base. Being in Bagram was a major difference because that base is enormous, But yeah, once we were there, they placed our unit. We were right by the C-130s, but we were also right next to the emergency evac helicopters, and the hospital was like right behind us. So that was a little bit interesting, seeing that and being there for that, being there right next to those guys.
Did you have more of a sense that there was a war going on this time?
Definitely. About every 2-3 days, and we got it actually kind of figured out on the time frame. It was either going to be 9 at night or 2 in the morning, and they would mortar or rocket. I don't remember exactly what the armament was because they never really explained it, other than they just call it mortars, but they would shoot mortars down at us from the mountains, or from the city or whatever, because there was a city right outside the base. And yeah, it was always like 9 o'clock or 2. It was weird. But every couple days I would just fire off, like 2 or 3 rockets, and most of the time it hit nothing, and then sometimes it hit everything, It was really sporadic, and I don't know if it was just because they were using really crude tubes and setups and everything like that to try to hit the targets, but they would just aim at the light and shoot. And then once that would happen, we'd have to get in the bunkers. They had like these little kind of like square, quick poured cement bunkers that would protect you from, like a direct hit at least once from mortars. And then once we would get inside there, we, would have to wait for, they would send out helicopters, attack helicopters, to go and try to find little buggers and blast them away, But for the most part, we would be in these bunkers for like an hour, and then we just have to sit there, and it's really annoying, especially if you were sleeping. Wake up every day, or not every day, but every couple days, you lose like almost 2 hours of sleep because you got to get up, put on all your gear, grab your rifle, and then get in a bunker, and then wait. And then by the time you get back to your room, you're like so awake you don't want to go back to sleep right away. So it was just kind of annoying.
Now, did you still have the night shift, or were you on days now, or?
I was on both. They changed the way that the shifts work. Instead of it being like a 5 to 2 or 5 to 7, they literally did it noon to noon. So I was on from 12 noon until 12 midnight, and for like half the time, and then they swapped it up. A lot of people wanted to have like a little bit of a change and stuff like that, but it was still a 12-hour shift either way. And you just get used to sleeping whatever time it is for you to sleep anyways. Sunlight doesn't really matter too much, especially because they have like huge like football field lights all over the flight line and stuff like that. So if you wanted to get your work done, you can. It wasn't an issue, and you didn't have to ever worry about like small arms fire from a random sniper because they were just too far away anyways, for where the aircraft were. So that never was an issue.
All right. Now, what kind of facilities do they have at Bagram that you didn't have in Iraq?
Well, what they had in Iraq that we didn't have in Bagram was we had better sleeping facilities in Iraq. In Bagram, at least where we were placed, we were in old, you can't even call them quats and huts. I just call them little shacks because they're basically 2x4 and plywood with holes in the ceiling and screen windows, to keep the bugs out, which it didn't matter because they would come through the holes in the ceiling. And yeah, it's just all just these really crappy wood things. It looked like they tried to make them into look like cubicles for people to have. And then over time, people started like adding on wood pieces and blankets and stuff like that to kind of encapsulate your room, so that way you have more privacy. Because, being around the same people, you end up usually sleeping in the same hut as them. You don't want to see them 24 hours a day. 12 hours a day is enough. But yeah, we were just all in these like little wooden huts, and where we were at, I always thought that the base was kind of like L-shaped. And we were like right on the end of the L, and the city was literally, I don't know, maybe a half mile, not even a half mile, maybe a quarter mile on the outside of the fence. It was close. So we were right on like the outer perimeter, at least where we were sleeping.
Okay. Now, did they have more entertainment facilities and things like that at Bagram? Were there theaters?
Yeah,
or stuff?
the base was supposed to be the R&R base for, the other guys and stuff like that, the infantry guys that were, doing some real work down south and Kandahar and everything like that. And so when they went on R&R, they would come to the base. For us, there was stuff that we could have done. They had, weird cheerleaders coming in, comedians coming in and stuff like that. And for the most part, we're just kind of like, whatever, We felt like we had it good enough that we didn't need the extra stuff, leave it for the guys that deserve it more. They had like a main area that was like a bazaar. You could buy weird random stuff. I know one place was like you could buy fur. Like you could buy fur that you can't buy in the United States fur, It's like, huh. That's cool. I almost bought some and like hid it in the aircraft so we could fly it back home, but just weird random stuff. Some kind of food places. They had a Pizza Hut. One of them was just there, and then they had another place where the people would sell like local Afghani food. And the food was terrible, but they had bread that was good. The chow halls were They were about the same. I mean, it was good in Iraq because they had like a better setup, and then in Afghanistan it was good because the main food was better, or I guess they had more options. And Iraq was more like you get two options, you know, take it or leave it kind of thing. But you had a lot more options in Bagram, and it was good food. It was Air Force food, so it was tasty.
Okay. Working with the right people. But
Yeah.
you're still at a level above the MRE or whatever.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if we wanted to have MREs, and sometimes we'd have to eat MREs, sometimes it'd be like, hey, you know, our food shipment didn't like make it in. You know, we got kind of a shortage for a few days, and then they'd send us over like a pallet of MREs, and then you just kind of dig through it. I never really minded MREs, like even though we would do like training, like for the month that we were in Yuma, you know, they'd be like, you can either eat at the chow hall or they'd have MREs available, and most of us just ate MREs because we didn't want to do the run literally to the chow hall and back because they're like, you got a half hour, so you'd have to run there, eat, and run back. I'm like, I'll just eat an MRE. Sounds good.
Okay. Now, when you were in Afghanistan, did you ever go off the base?
No. The closest that I got to going off the base was the main gate, and we were trying to go off base because they had another bazaar that was actually off base. I had the day off, and me and my buddy were trying to go, and they're like, no, you know, you can't go. We've had an issue with someone trying to, you know, drive on base with an IED. No, you can't go outside the base today. But we ended up going to this other spot. There was actually a school that was kind of, it wasn't on the base, but it was on the base. I didn't really understand how that worked, but they're like, well, this isn't on the base, but it was still inside like the, you know, cement perimeter. And so we went over to the school and saw a bunch of like the school kids, all from the Bagram city, you know, going over there and learning and stuff like that. And most of the time they're just like, you got candy? And I'm like, no, I don't have candy. You know, but it was fun. It was kind of cool to see kids. You know, it's something you're not used to seeing, and you know, being around kids. And then there's just like tons of them. You know, all there for school.
All right. Now, did you have any sort of Afghan personnel or people that you actually dealt with at all, or?
There was at the end, like the last 2 months of the deployment, I actually hurt my back working on the aircraft. So they put me on basically security duty for the last 2 months that I was there. And I mean, they had the sergeant of the guard and the corporal of the guard, and the corporal of the guard usually was out and about with the lance corporals and PFCs and stuff like that. And then the sergeant of the guard, he was inside this little, one of those huts, you know, but this one was like an office. And they had a camera that was roving all the time on that perimeter that I was telling you about earlier, because 1 month before we showed up, it was that side of the base was attacked, like a heavy attack. They were attacking from all sides, but they actually, a couple guys got in and injured a gunny and a lance corporal from the unit that was there previously. So they bolstered the perimeter with T-walls, which is like these giant 20 some odd foot cement walls with razor wire on the top of it. But we still had that camera to rove on there. So we had one guy inside watching the camera at all times, and then the guy outside directing the other guys to be like, all right, you know, we always kept our own security, because as much as we like the Air Force guys, being in the towers that were near us, we didn't trust them enough to keep us secure. So,
well, Air Force guys aren't infantry anyway.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. Now, you also had mentioned before we started this that you had been hit at some point by shrapnel from a mortar.
Yeah.
Where does that come in the sequence?
That actually is the last day we were there.
Oh.
Which was kind of like a weird coincidence. We were going through packing up all our stuff and everything like that, and like I said, it was just one of those times where they were going to be. It wasn't the normal time that they mortared us, so it wasn't anything that we were kind of expecting. And my buddy and I, we literally had all of our stuff packed up in our sea bags and our main pack and everything like that. The only thing that I didn't pack was my rifle, you know. And I just got back from the shower. We had our music turned up and we were just talking or whatever. And as we're packing stuff, and you could hear it, because you'd always hear like the initial sound of the boom. It was real quiet where it got launched out of the tube, and then you'd hear the whistle, and then you'd hear the explosion. And with the music up so loud, we heard the boom, but I was like, did you hear that? I wasn't sure. And sure enough, I mean, they were launching them and they were landing right on us, not in the building, but around us. So we both grabbed our rifles and we started running for the closest barriers that we could get under. And, I was wearing silkies, which are very short green issued pants and flip-flops, and that's it. And I had my rifle, running like crazy to get under cover. And by the time I got in there, the adrenaline's going so much that I never noticed that I took a small piece in my arm, and I was just in there. And then the guy's like, hey, you're bleeding. And I look at my arms and I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm looking all over my body. And he turned my hand over and you could see just a little bit blood trickling out of there. I mean, it wasn't like gushing blood or anything like that, but it's just like I didn't even notice it, until he pointed it out. So then afterwards I went and saw the corpsman, and he just took his little tweezers, pulled it out, cleaned it up, and put some super glue over it, and it was fine. But definitely the closest encounter I had, at least when I was there, was the last day.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you have any sense while you were in Afghanistan of sort of what a bigger picture was, or what was going on in the conflict at that point?
Yeah, definitely. And that's the reason why we actually got mortared. It was kind of, no one really knew why, but then I was told by my friend that he kind of understood why. He was one of the guys I was like to call him secret squirrels. He does all the kind of secret stuff. So he doesn't actually work on the aircraft. He just does the briefings for the pilots and everything like that. At the time that the mortaring started, it wasn't just that day. It was the next like 3 days that it happened. And what he put it as a correlation was that was the same time that Osama bin Laden was taken out, supposedly taken out. I mean, that's still up for debate, but pretty sure it happened. But he's like, yeah, that mission that because it was our last flight, and they're like, we need to send 3 aircraft out, and we're like, that's kind of weird, And he's like, that flight that we went on was a part of that thing. So we're like, oh, that makes sense why they're so pissed off and firing on us like every couple hours, and had people. I mean, you could hear little small fire skirmishes going on and stuff like that, because not all the base had that T barrier. I would say maybe a quarter of the base did, the base or the side of the base that was near the city, but all around the other side it was just fencing and razor wire and maybe some mines. Not that we put any out there, but the Soviets, there were still mines from the Soviets. But yeah, it was just crazy the last couple days that we were there. And then that delayed us actually leaving, because they had to patch up all the holes that were on the flight line being punched in from rockets and stuff like that. And finally, after, I'd say about a week after the first incident happened, we were able to leave and everything like that. But
okay.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. But that was like the only thing that was really affecting us with the major issues that were going on.
Mm-hmm. But otherwise, you don't really have any kind of feel for what the situation in the country is. You just do your job.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only other way that I'd really kind of know like something bigger was going on or something happened was the amount of people being brought back on the helipad next door. And they were, our command told the people in the hospital and everything like that, and they told us, they're like, if you guys want to help, we're telling them that if they ever need people to help get guys off the helicopters or anything like that, let us know. And they're like, okay, we'll let you know. And then, yeah, it happened a few days where they're like, we need a couple guys to help us because we got about, 25 guys coming back, and they had all their helicopters gone. I think usually they had about 5 or 6 helicopters just out on the flight pad, and I think the hangar that they had next to it, there was more inside there that they're always working on, but it was just crazy, and you'd see guys that their legs would be gone, their arms would be gone and stuff like that, and it was pretty tough.
Yeah. All right. Now, you have internet access and things like that, so did you try to keep track at all of the news or what was happening in that sense?
I usually did. I usually wanted to see what was going on. If there was anything that was news, but the thing that was kind of strange with the news is that the news is always old news. At least the news that you guys would see, I already knew about. So it just kind of like, most of the time it was the news that you'd find out on base. If I really wanted to know what was up, going on, and stuff like that, I would just talk to the people at the hospital and be like, hey, have you guys heard anything? Is there anything going on? Has there been any casualties? And they'd usually let us know right away.
All right. So now when do you get back to the States?
Let's see. Got back in the States, I think, at the beginning of May in 2011.
Okay.
And so that was about right.
And how long did your enlistment run?
My enlistment was 5 years. So once I got back, I was looking at the end of my enlistment and everything like that, and things were starting to change. I mean, we had some more guys leave before me, and then we had a bunch of new guys come in, and they put us in like these weird hangars that were not, we had these 4, or I should say they were 2, they're just 2 conjoined and then 2 conjoined hangars, but they were being completely rebuilt. So they put us in this weird old hangar that was, I think, like originally a C-130 hangar, and we were supposed to have the entire hangar, but then I think a couple weeks before we got there, a Harrier pilot crashed and died because they do all the Harrier training there. And so his aircraft was in the other half of the hangar because they were using it for like doing the inspection and stuff like that.
Okay. You'd gotten back to the States, and you mentioned the part where there was a Harrier that had crashed, and they brought that in there, inspecting that and so forth. Now, your squadron then never lost any aircraft while you were on those deployments.
No.
Did they ever come back with any kind of battle damage at all, or?
There was one once in Afghanistan. We had one of the wings took a bullet. Don't know what kind of bullet and everything like that, but it did take a shot to the wing, and so basically it was kind of convenient in a sense because the way that the wings are with the Prowler, they're actually able to fold, and it hit the outer wing. If it hit the inner wing, that aircraft probably would have been done, or at least downed for a long time. But since it hit the outer wing, they downed it, and then they basically just ordered a new one. Or new, and then they got the replacement in, and then of course, when you try to put a piece from a different aircraft onto that aircraft, it doesn't quite fit right. But they got it to finally work, and it was, it worked well enough that they could use it for flight and everything like that.
Okay. Now, when you got back to the States and you went back to Cherry Point, then how much time did you have left on your enlistment?
Let's see, I got back in May. So that would have basically gave me another 9 months left.
All right. And with that amount of time left, would you then not go on another deployment, or?
If I wanted to, I could have went on another deployment. But actually, the thing that was kind of weird because, in Iraq, the reason why we had a 6-month deployment is because 2 units would go out at a time. They just changed it when I got back, and they're like, okay, now you have more time at home. I think they had like a 9-month revolution at that point. So you would be home for at least 9 or 10 months, and then you'd go back and be deployed for 6 or 7 months. And because they were only sending 1 unit at a time, that actual time frame kind of expanded a bit. But yeah, they only had room for 1 Prowler squadron, and at the same time they were starting to stand down different squadrons. In the next 5 years, since then they started to disassemble different Q squadrons because they're just, the aircraft are being retired, But
So are there newer aircraft that do the same thing?
Yes and no. There are newer aircraft. They call them the EA-18 Growler, which is an adaptation of the F-18. But to say they do the same job, no way. Even though the Prowler was old and a really crappy aircraft, it did a phenomenal job for what it did for electronic jamming. And I think one of the main reasons why it was so good at its capacity was because the entire system was still kind of wheel and pulley with the controls, you know. The F-18s are all electronic controls. So the major issues that the Navy was having when they were starting to create these aircraft was that it was jamming itself. And, you know, that's a pretty big issue if you're jamming your own flight controls and, you know, oh, I can't control my flight or my aircraft, you know. So, I mean, I think that they worked out a lot of bugs, but I still think that there's issues that arise, and it just doesn't have such a great capacity as much as the Prowler did. I think that they might have changed the type of work it did, but not as much as the Prowler would be able to. Mm-hmm. And I know that the Army has like also a variation of a basically a prop plane. It's a small like 2-man plane that does kind of the same thing, you know, that's like their version of the electronic aircraft, but again, it never would be able to do as much as the Prowler does.
Okay. Now, by the time you got back to the States, had you decided whether or not you were going to re-enlist?
Yeah, I decided that actually pretty early on in my enlistment. A lot of people ask me, like, well, why did you enlist in the first place if you weren't planning on being there the whole time? And I'm like, well, I didn't enlist with, you know, the whole thought in mind that I was going to be there for 20 years. I wasn't looking to retire out of the Marine Corps. I basically went for 2 reasons. I wanted to do, well, 3 reasons. I wanted to do my duty, I wanted to do it for my family, and I wanted the GI Bill to go to college. So with those 3 things in mind, once it was time to go, I was like, all right, see you later. Thanks for everything.
Okay. Now, you know, how old were you when 9/11 happened?
Let's see, I was in 9th grade, so 15 years old.
Yeah, because you're born in '86, so yeah.
Yeah, so about 15 years old.
All right, and do you remember how you learned about that or what happened that day?
Yep. It's just kind of one of those weird things that you always like remember those events very, very clearly. I was in school at that day. It was 9, I think, sometime around 9 in the morning, and I was in my health class. And all the rooms had their own little like TV, and they actually were connected to like the news. Don't know how or why, but it doesn't matter. But we were there, and then teacher gets a call on the phone, and he's like, "What?" You know. He turns on the TV, and sure enough, that's what was on the news. You know, and it was right after the first tower was hit, and then as we're sitting there watching, the second tower gets hit, and you know, it's pretty intense.
Okay, and did that experience or the fact that this stuff was going on, did that affect your decision to enlist later on?
I think it did a little bit. It definitely, I mean, I didn't have the whole mindset like, I got to get after the terrorists or anything like that, but it was more or less that I want to do my part in protecting everyone, you know, my family, my friends.
Mm-hmm. And did you assume when you enlisted that you'd probably get sent overseas to one of these places?
Oh yeah, I definitely knew that, especially like going to the Marines. I'm like, I'll probably deploy, you know, don't know how many times or where I'll go, but definitely was expecting to be deployed.
Okay, all right. And so, and did they make much of an effort to get you to re-enlist?
No, not really. I think that was the beginning of them trying to start their downsizing. This was at, I think, the beginning of the Obama administration, mm-hmm. So they were kind of happy to see people go. They didn't really care either way.
Yeah, I guess it would have been Obama round 2, or it's because he's reelected because he's elected in '08, so he's president in '09-10, so he's already there. But yeah, but the idea is they've mostly drawn out of Iraq, and they're wanting to get out of Afghanistan, and so yeah, as you mentioned, they didn't think they needed as many of these squadrons anymore. Yeah, so you kind of fit their plans anyway, mm-hmm. going out when you did. All right. So when do you actually get out?
I got out in February of 2012, and basically, you know, when I was living down there, I had an apartment off base. By that time, I didn't want to live in the barracks anymore because it was pretty bad. So I had to move all my stuff up, you know, grabbed a U-Haul truck and packed all my stuff up and drove home. and I ended up moving in with my brother for the time being and everything like that, and put everything away. And it was kind of weird because I think it was really warm that year, because I remember there wasn't a lot of snow when I was moving my stuff in. So it just kind of worked out that way.
Okay. And at that point, did you go get a job, go to school? What did you do?
I held off on school. I was trying to get a job in the aircraft community, trying to apply at like the Gerald R. Ford or anything like that. And at that point in time, literally like nobody was hiring, you know. So I started putting in different applications for different places, and then it's like all the savings that I had at that point were slowly being diminished because I still had bills to pay and everything like that. So my brother, he works at a plastic mold injection plant, our factory for car parts. He's like, hey, just go and apply, and I'll put in a good word and get you hired. So went there and started working the next day. I put in a couple job applications too to like security places. And then about 2 months after I was working at the factory, I got a call from Loomis Armored, and they're like, hey, you can come work for us. And I'm like, okay, see you, factory. I'll go work for the security people, and deliver money. So after that, I wanted to start in school, but I wasn't really sure on what I wanted to do yet, and I didn't want to just waste the time because you only have 36 months of GI Bill, So I was like, well, once I really figure out what I want to do, then I'll apply. And then so it was about another year or so, year and a half, and then I applied to Grand Valley.
Okay. And what are you majoring in?
Electrical engineering.
Okay. And did you find you had anything useful that you brought with you from the time in the Marines, or were you starting from ground zero?
I felt like I was starting at ground zero with a lot of the basic classes, stuff that it's like you get out of high school and it's like you're just doing this the other day, and it's like some of the math classes and stuff like that. Like, I haven't done math in 10 years. That is, it's quite different. So it's like basically reteaching everything that I used to know before. And so I think that in that sense, it's kind of harder, but at the other sense, when it comes on to hands-on things and being able to see something for what it is mechanically or anything like that, I think the Marine Corps definitely helped me in that sense, being able to apply that to real life things.
But you also did make it through the higher math classes and stuff that you needed for that program, right? Okay. Do you think that the service, did it give you a kind of self-discipline or anything like that that actually helps you get the schoolwork done, or?
I think it
tell?
does sometimes. It helps because I'm able to juggle between different projects and stuff like that, and it hurts because I'm so attention to detail, like that I sometimes spend too much time on something else when I should be managing my time better. So, I'd find that things wouldn't be done right or completed just because I would spend too much time on something else because I was being super anal about it.
Okay. In general, how easy or hard was it to readjust to civilian life?
Well, civilian life, being not in school, it wasn't too hard because I just kind of kept away from people. The only people that I'd really have to see once I started working with Loomis was the people that I'd work with that day, and then, some of the people, being around people like at the different stops that we'd have to do and stuff like that. But like going out, hey, you want to go to the mall? Nope. I don't want to be around masses of people, and I don't know, I guess a lot of people said that it took me still a long time to kind of become the me I was before the military, and yeah, I guess the adjustment took some time. It took about a year, and that's probably around the same time that I joined school. I was like ready to immerse myself with that, be around lots of people. And then once school came around, I was like, that's different, it was still kind of a shocking thing. It was a little bit different, but it was fun. It was good.
Okay. Now, you're coming in, you're a little bit older than the standard college-age students at this point. I mean, is there kind of a gap between the people who've been in the military and so forth and the rest of them, or?
Yeah, and you can usually tell the other students if they're also previous veterans. I mean, if for one thing, you'll see them, they'll have something on them, whether it's their bag or something like that, or they'll have a tattoo peeking out of their shirt, and they're like, hey, where were you, you know? And we'll talk a little bit and meet up like that. And I mean, it's kind of hard to relate to some of the younger kids because it's like they feel like they don't understand, or they think that they know, but they really don't.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking to veterans for a very long time, and I know there's stuff I'm never going to get intuitively because I just haven't done it. But yeah, and do you associate much with, I mean, you kind of hang out at all with sort of other student veterans, or is there?
Actually, no. The guy that I've been actually close friends with for the past about year and a half, he's just a guy that was in the engineering program as well, and we were in like a writing class of all things, and we just hit it off really well. And so he's one of the guys I spent a lot of my time with, you know, even outside of class and everything like that. But I mean, I got some friends that I met through Loomis that are also veterans, and they also go to Grand Valley, so that's kind of like a double introduction to their life. So it's like I hang out with them as well too.
All right. If you kind of look back at the whole thing, how do you think your time in the Marine Corps wound up affecting you?
Well, I think it made me a more responsible person. I guess better person. I wouldn't have changed anything. You know, the experience was the experience that I needed to be who I am today. So I definitely appreciate everything that I did get out of the Marine Corps. And even though a lot of the days I'm like, oh, this sucks, I want to get out of here, you know, but looking back at it, besides all the stupid crap that would happen, you know, I like it. I liked the work. I liked the people that I worked with, and it was good.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming in and sharing a story today.
Thank you.